want to talk to you about setting up SAML authentication within IBM Resilient. So IBM Resilient supports the use of SAML, so customers can use their organizational login credentials to authenticate into IBM Resilient. The SAML specification identifies two different types of endpoints that are relevant to SAML and IBM Resilient. One is the identity provider, or IDP, and the other the service provider, which in this case is IBM Resilient. IBM Resilient acts as a service provider, whilst a customer's authentication system, such as Microsoft ADFS server, is the identity provider. To set up SAML federation between IBM Resilient and your IDP, you need to do a number of things. Number one, create a SAML federation. Number two, import the SAML metadata into your IDP. Number three, test and any troubleshooting. It's worth mentioning that for users who previously used IBM Resilient, i.e. local users, people who have local accounts within IBM Resilient, they will have their password blanked or cleared out as the authentication is done at the IDP level. If the user does not log in via SAML using the SAML URL, which we'll show you later, they can continue to use their local account and local password. So the password is cleared as soon as you authenticate using the SAML URL. Now, to create the SAML federation, we need two things from your IDP. We need your identity provider authentication URL and the identity provider public SSL certificate. You will also need the organization name from within IBM Resilient and the alias which you want to use, which will make up the URL for SAML users. So putting this all together with the resutil command looks a little bit like this. Now I'll talk you through what these various options are. So firstly, we've got the usual resutil command. SAML edit is in this case, which is a command to create and edit existing SAML configurations. So the alias, this is what will go into the URL, which again I'll show you later. So the create users option there, that allows you to, if the user isn't in Resilient, so if the user that is using this federation going through your IDP is not a user of IBM Resilient, then they will be added to the organization specified. Now, if you do not choose this option, then you will need to invite users from the UI within Administrator Settings, Users tab. This allows, the Create Users option allows you to not to worry about users within Resilient, but to manage the manage users from your IDP level. So, for example, you might assign a number of people roles or groups at your IDP, and the people within with those roles or within those group or groups, they're the people who can get through the IDP to Resilient. If you do not have those permissions at the IDP level, then you will receive some kind of message at your IDP stopping you from continuing further. And so then we're on to the cert file. The cert file is the IDP's public certificate I mentioned previously. The org is, in my case, CB Limited, is the organization name within Resilient. And the login URL is the identity provider's authentication URL. In my case, I'm using a generic ADFS authentication URL. So if I run this command, then it will act on that and it will do a number of things, and on the output will show us the configuration values. It'll also output two files, alias/metadata.xml. Aliases will be what we put in here. In this case will be the alias resilient, so it'll be resilient/metadata.xml, Likewise, you will have alias slash sp slash cert.pen, and again, in my case, will be resilient slash sp slash cert.pen. And those two files, you will want to take them and give them to whoever manages your IDP, and in my case, ADFS. So here is the output. So we'll go briefly through some of this. So here we show the organisation within the IBM Resilient organisation, which is CB Limited. Create users, because I use that. Otherwise, you say something like do not create users. The alias resilient matches this. The service provider identifier. Now you'll see here, it will be using your base URL that you've set. It will always append SAML2, and then resilient at the end there. That matches up for the alias. That's how that comes into play. If you change your alias, you change that. The authentication URL, that's the same in this case. The identity provider authentication URL is what we used here for the login URL. And there's some other values here that you can set, and you can see them both if you run the sudo resutal SAML edit /help, and that'll come back with other options available to you. Worthwhile looking through those before you set up SAML, because there are some things that you may need to use depending on your IDP configuration and preferences there. So here is the IDP certificate, which is being taken from cert file. That's displayed here. And then we have the service provider certificate. That is basically a resilient certificate. So that is the PEM file that will be positive. We'll see a little bit further here. Here is the metadata, also the XML that I mentioned earlier. That's just printed out to the console here. So further down here, you'll see there resilient metadata XML and resilient SP cert.pen. They'll be saved to the directory wherever you run that command. So by default, it might be home res admin, but you may have CD to a different directory. So you can also run the similar command against multiple orgs. So for example, you want a single config to cover multiple organizations, then you'll see here, same command, but I've added an additional org here, okay, to complement the previous one. Now I'm not going to use that because I do not have an org called CB Limited Development, but it's just there to show you what is possible. So as I said, now you've got the two files here, resilient metadata XML and the PEM file. You need to provide them give them to your IDP, and they will need to do something with it depending on their product documentation. They may need to create a federation called a Relying Party Trust, but your IDP team will know how to do that. So also to talk about what Resilient requires. So Resilient requires three things in the SAML response. The SAML response is what is sent back from your IDP. So it requires an email. Let me see actually here. It also requires a first name here. It also requires a surname. If you do not send all of those three attributes in the SAML response, you will not get into Resilient. It will not work. So there are other things you can pass. You can pass phone number, mobile number, title, and groups. So there are other things you can send there. Now, if you want to send groups in the SAML response, then you need to map those groups in IBM's Resilient, so that when the SAML responses come into Resilient will check through the SAML response. It will try and map a group. If the group is a match, then that user will be added to that group. If it's not a match and it's not mapped in IBM Resilient, then it will be ignored, and you'll see a message written to the client.log if you've got debug enabled. Now, so as we mentioned earlier up here, the URL that we're provided here is thus, and we'll attempt to log into there. I'm going to use Chrome, so this is used in ADFS. So the URL will redirect, as you can see there, and that's my ADFS login. then redirect and just log me into IBM Resilient. As I mentioned before, if you're using the create users option, you should consider locking down access to the IDP at the IDP level. You should probably consider that regardless. But as you said, you can manage users from within IBM Resilient should you wish, from administrator settings, users, and you can then invite users that way. This is how you set up SAML in IBM Resilient. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for your time and attention. Please refer to the IBM Security Learning Academy for more training resources.